there's that physical aspect, but there's this more nuanced social and emotional aspect of it. I mean, your senses are on your skin. You feel, you touch, and that can bring comfort or it can bring pain.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. I remember the first time I really sat down to think about skin. It was in my early 20s when I was learning about human papillomavirus, or HPV, and how certain strains of the virus were found to affect cutaneous skin, which is found generally on the outside of your body. And other strains of the virus were found to affect mucosal skin, which is found on the inside spaces of your body, like in your nose and your gut. I honestly haven't kept up on the current research to know if that's still the current thinking on HPVs, but it was the first time I realized that there was actually skin inside our bodies. And it got me wondering about, what's the purpose and function of skin, and why is the skin so different on the inside versus on the outside? For example, why does it have to have mucus on it on the inside, but not on the outside? Later, I learned it needed to be mucosal inside the body for lubrication, protection, and also for mixing stuff. Look down at the skin in your hands. Feel the skin there on your hands, or maybe even feel the skin on your face or your neck. What's your first reaction? Is it temperature that you feel, or a texture that you feel, or maybe you notice a color, or even something else altogether? Well, few people will be able to speak about the multidimensional aspects of skin more beautifully than my guest today, and I feel like we only scratched the surface. Pun intended. You're listening to the Wisdom of the Body. Today, I'm here with Dr. Raja Sivamani, who's a board-certified dermatologist and an Ayurvedic practitioner, and hosts the wellness platform Jivome. He practices at his medical and surgical dermatology practice, Pacific Skin Institute, and his integrative and aesthetics research clinic, Zen Dermatology. He's the director of clinical research in the Department of Dermatology at the University of California at Davis, and he is the co-director of the Microbiome Research Initiative at the California State University, Sacramento. He focuses on general and integrative dermatology, including medical, surgical, and cosmetic services with training in bioengineering, allopathic, and Ayurvedic medicine. His training in Ayurvedic medicine lets him take a more humanistic approach to patient care, science, and research. Dr. Sivamani has over 110 peer-reviewed publications and a textbook on cosmeceuticals. He leads many clinical studies that focus on the impacts of foods, nutrition, the microbiome, and the gut-skin axis, as well as studies on standard Western medications and devices. He serves on the editorial team for LearnSkin.com and is a chair for the annual Integrative Dermatology Symposium and one of 3 founding directors of the Integrative Dermatology Certificate Program. Raja, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh my God, Heather, that was such a very nice introduction. And it makes it sound like I don't do anything else but sit around and not sleep. But believe me, I think I appreciate opportunities to kind of sit and have a chance to talk, especially with people like you.
Well, I know there's even more on that bio list that you didn't put. I know you're involved in so many things in the integrative medicine and Ayurveda and in teaching, and you're also on the board of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association with me. And so I know there's even more on this list that you didn't put. You've got your feelers out in a lot of places and you're influencing a lot of things. And I'm really excited to talk with you today because you have such a unique perspective, being someone who has studied both, I would say, conventional medicine. You have an MD, and also that you've studied Ayurvedic medicine and that you teach in integrative medicine. So coming from this sort of joint background, I'd love to know, I guess to start, how do you see the definitions of health being defined in sort of conventional or Western medicine versus other traditions of medicine that you've come across?
Yeah. And, it's so easy to get esoteric, but really breaking it down into the basics, I think it really comes down to understanding the relationship of a person with their body and realizing that absence of disease doesn't always equal health. And I think everybody listening and yourself has almost become maybe even close to cliche talking about it in that way. But it's true. The absence of disease is how we define health from a conventional perspective. You go for a wellness check or if you go for just any sort of a general medical checkup, usually they're looking to see, is something wrong, right? The question isn't, is everything right? The question usually is, oh, let's try to look for any sort of weird, as they say, pathology or something that maybe is out of sorts. But how many times have you gone and someone says, hey, how are you eating and how's that making you feel? And then really delving into maybe, the aspects of the mind or aspects of the body, because I think things that you can't measure and we don't have a lab test for yet is the most difficult things. Like, do you feel hopeful? Do you feel optimistic? Do you feel vital? I mean, these are things that you don't have an objective quote endpoint besides asking a subjective question, right? You can't just measure vitality. You can in other systems. They have measures for that, but it's not quantitative necessarily. And so I think that's where there's this push-pull between the need for quantitation and the understanding that we can't have quantitation be everything, because it's not. The qualitative aspects, like, do you feel loved? I mean, these all make a huge difference in how healthy you feel.
Raja, you use the word allopathic, and I want to dive into this with you because my partner is a biomedical scientist. He's a PhD in biomedical science, and he thinks that that's a word that us alternative people like me use to describe conventional medicine, and that it's not a positive term. And I really don't quite understand the definition of allopathic and its origin. But because you used it, what's your understanding of what allopathy means?
Allopathy was not originally an endearing term, but it's becoming a descriptive term of differentiation, but it was not originally coined by the conventional medical community. In fact, I think it was coined by the folks that were looking and developing homeopathic medicine. And then as a contradiction to that, there was allopathic medicine that was then coined. So it really was initially, I don't know if you could say it was derogatory, but it was meant to be a way of defining boundaries. And then, the allopathic community has kind of just absorbed it. And there are divisions. Some people say it's not an endearing term. Other people say, it's a term that describes a well-defined characteristics of how medicine is practiced. So they just go forth with it. I'm not offended by it, but I also know the origins of it. And so, maybe I rest easy with it because I see myself as being a bit more integrative anyway. But you don't see a lot of allopathic medical docs walking around saying that they're allopathic. They'll usually just say, we just practice medicine. That's kind of the approach that they want to take. And I think all of us should probably head in that direction. But I think the term is used just to define the differences between, say, naturopathic approaches or homeopathic approaches or Ayurvedic approaches. We don't have you can say conventional, but conventional isn't really conventional in other countries. Like in, say, a country where a traditional medicine is really has a stronghold. What does conventional mean anymore? And I think that's where allopathic is a little bit better of a definition.
I see. When I was looking into the definition of allopathic, I came across it being used in the realm of saying that a type of medicine uses drugs and surgery as its main method of care. I'm not sure how the listeners hear it, and some of them may have never even heard of it. Maybe it's kind of like a thing that we use in the field of medicine more than what normal people say. But what you were saying about, for example, traditional medicines, what is normal, what is mainstream, like in India, there's 400,000 something
right
practitioners.
Ayurveda, right, exactly.
So, obviously they have like so many more people that live there as well, but, as opposed to the couple thousand Ayurvedic practitioners in the US, there's 400 something thousand of them in India. So it's like more normal there. And I know your background, your family is Indian in origin, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And mine is not. Mine is Italian and Polish and all these, other things. And so we are two people that found Ayurveda and studied it. And I'd love to know for you, because you went to medical school first, right?
I did. I did go to medical school first.
Okay.
That's right.
First of all, what brought you to medical school, and then what brought you to Ayurveda?
So I did something before medical school that changed my whole viewpoint about why integrative medicine was so important. And it was basically this idea that you need to know mechanisms, like how the body works, not just memorize. And so I was an engineer before I went to medical school. And I guess once an engineer, you're always an engineer. But I did bioengineering. And what I loved about the principles of bioengineering was that you take known concepts and you put the pieces together. You don't always have to know what the answer is. You don't have to memorize and pre-memorize the answer. The beauty of that was you have to personalize each solution to each situation. That sounds a lot like a lot of the traditional approaches that are out there, except you're doing it in an engineering standpoint. So if you have some problem, the next problem that walks in the door, even though you might have a similar principle, you can't just plug the same solution because maybe there's a nuance in there that's changed, or maybe there's some conditions that are different. In bioengineering, maybe, something that you applied to the kidney, you can't just do that to the skin because the access points are different. So you have to change something in the workings or the outer workings to make that happen. And then from there, the reason I went to medical school was, I love humanity. I love conversing with patients. The notion that allopathic medicine is just drugs and surgery it's incorrect. That's not what it's all about. There's a lot of conversation that occurs. There's a lot of just support that still happens. Just yesterday, I saw a son and a mother that were just not connecting, and it was causing a lot of angst in the room. And I actually spent time having one of them in one room and another in another room, just talking and trying to get them together. And I know my colleagues in dermatology would do the same thing, even if they didn't have the training in integrative medicine. I know many of them will still take that time and think through the social situation. So there's other things in there. But going back to your question, when I went to medical school, there was a lot of learning of pathophysiology. There was a lot of learning and that's just like biochemical pathways and how disease occurs. But what I didn't get was really delving more into things like nutrition or mind, body, and understanding that there's a connection that's maybe deeper. And I don't mean religious, but maybe at a spiritual level. And I felt like that piece was missing, but I learned the other pieces really well. But coming from that engineering perspective, I felt like if I didn't have these pieces, I wouldn't be able to solve or help people address issues in their health if I was only going to treat with one hand tied behind my back. That's how I felt. And so that's why I turned to Ayurvedic medicine, because I wanted to learn nutrition much better. That was actually the reason I went into Ayurvedic medicine. And I also wanted to understand why I was dealing with IBS growing up. I thought I'd go to medical school and figure it out, and I didn't. And so I thought, okay, clearly I need more information. And so when I went through Ayurvedic training, I started to realize, okay, we have these imbalances. So it's not just a disease that has been labeled as a diagnostic disease, but you have these imbalances that you can start to then see how food ties into that. And I quickly realized, oh my gosh, this is why I was having IBS. I changed my diet. I haven't had IBS in 20 years, Heather. It went away as soon as I started learning this stuff and started applying it. And so, that is the shift that occurred to me, is that realizing there are imbalances and balances that are present at a more subtle level that you can address, and that vitality is a thing that can be addressed, because we all know this. You feel good or you don't, and not feeling good doesn't always mean that you have a disease that's diagnostically diagnosable in Western medicine. So that's the issue. And so I feel like that's where looking at other traditions, and it doesn't have to be Ayurveda specifically. Traditional Chinese, naturopathy, they have other tools that really go and delve into health as a humanistic person.
It's so interesting that, so many of us go to Ayurveda to heal ourselves. And does that not happen? And I guess you said that you thought you would solve that particular issue through going to medical school. But, one of the things that feels, and I think the same thing could happen in Ayurveda school if you just go in and try to memorize everything, right? And you don't sort of turn the flashlight back on yourself
That's
into
right.
the content that you're learning and actually study yourself in that context rather than some external object that you can't feel or empathize with.
I think that's totally true. Your point is a really good one. When I went to medical school to start with, I wasn't thinking that it was going to be me finding a journey on my own health path. I was thinking, oh, this is a way that I can reach out and help other people in need. But when I went to Ayurveda, and I guess I already had that in the back of my mind that I wanted to help others, but I went there also seeking, well, how can I understand my body a bit better as well? And so it was very personal when I went there. And there are very few people that go to medical school thinking, I'm going to figure out what's going on with my body. There absolutely are. But I don't think it's as high of a rate as you get in some of these other fields like Ayurveda, for example.
Rumi said, there are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground, and maybe you've been trying all of them. You want to feel strong and grounded, and at the same time, you want that creative energy to flow freely through you. But something seems to be preventing it, and you're sick of the struggle. Maybe you found a little taste of the surrender that you're looking for while doing yoga, or meditating, or on a retreat somewhere. But how's it possible to find in real life? If you're ready to tap into the wisdom of the body, and you want to build the feeling of community, I have a group for you. Body Church. Well, it's not really a church. It's a self-care membership program focused on your body, all of it. It's a gathering, a circle of the support you have been craving for you to dive into the intelligent functioning and poetry of your body more deeply than you've ever been able to before. If you want to be part of this very unique group program, head over to my website at heathergrish.com and see if we have a spot for you to try it out. That's heathergrish.com. We're starting to enroll people right now. Well, healing is such a weird thing. I mean, there's so many things that have gone on with us in our lives that we're not even conscious of. And I feel like sometimes when we pick a career, a lot of people actually pick something that's related to something that happened to them in their past. They're just not aware of it. Just an example, I happen to have a lot of, I'm sure you do too, a lot of clients who are medical professionals. And I have this one woman who is a pediatric nurse practitioner. And we were talking about how she actually felt like because she had gone through some trauma at that period of her life, that was one of the draws to her wanting to work with that particular population. So, whether it's conscious or not, I think a lot of us are drawn in some way to kind of solve the hero or the heroine's journey that we were on from the beginning of our life. I want to dig into the microbiome. I want to dig into the gut stuff with you because you have such an interesting perspective about what you call the gut-skin axis. And I have to be perfectly honest, I don't think in terms of the biome. I'm not like a germ theory person. I'm more of a terrain theory person. Mm-hmm. I'm oriented that way. I know there's both going on. So I'd love for you to explain the gut-skin axis first. What is that?
Right. Actually, your point about germ theory versus terrain, we're on the same page. I actually think we need to be thinking about things as terrain because when we think about any sort of shifts in the microbiome, a lot of us have looked at the bacteria as the first evolution of, and I call it an evolution, the first iteration of how we're going to talk about the microbiome. We always look at that bacteria. But the truth is there's way more involved in there. And, so when you're thinking about the terrain, which I think is a fantastic word, first of all, it's not just bacteria. There's also what are the foods that are down there stimulating certain bacteria to grow? What are the supplements that are down there? Or what is the lack of food, that's being put down there? Like say if you're fasting or whatnot, and it's the bacteria, the fungi. But the reason we have this axis, and it doesn't have to be gut skin, it could be gut mind, gut body, is that the gut, and Ayurveda even talks about this too. When you first eat, you have the 7 tissues in Ayurveda. And again, I don't want to get too esoteric, but they go rasa, which is this digestive juice that comes in after you've metabolized your food. And food, by the way, doesn't have to be just food. I mean, it can be what you see, what you hear, a lot of things that come in. And then that enters into rakta, which is the bloodstream. So same sort of a deal, you have this interface at the gut and it's talking to the immune system. And it's talking to the cells that are on the linings of your intestine. And then that's also communicating to the bloodstream and then to the liver. And then from there, you go off to the rest of the body. And either through the immune system or through indirect factors or through direct absorption of food, we have the house starting in the gut and then it moves elsewhere. And so there is this very delicate ballet that's occurring. And And so that's what I think is so important about the gut microbiome. Yes, we understand the bacteria that are there. We understand the fungi and the yeast that are there, but it's the interplay that I'm really interested in. How is that talking to the immune system? How is that sending off different signals into the rest of the body? And, those signals sometimes determine your status of health or your status of unhealth, as to say.
And how do those signals get, I guess, crossed or messed up or blocked, or, why do those signals malfunction sometimes?
Well, that I think is the key crux of the question that's being asked is, how do things work well? How do things go wrong? I'll give you some examples. If you're eating high quality foods that are going to promote health, there's going to be a bunch of signals that we're going to uncover in the coming years. But there are one set of signals known as short chain fatty acids. And these basically get into the system and they help promote a less inflammatory state for the gut itself. But not only that, when they go into systemic circulation, they seem to have anti-inflammatory actions when they're going through the bloodstream as well. And we've shown, as an example, we've done studies. We've shown, for example, in acne, people with acne have a deficiency in short chain fatty acids when we compare them to people that don't have acne. Now, that's not necessarily a causation of acne. It could be a side effect of many different things. But not only that, they've also shown in other studies, apart from our own studies, that people with acne have a deficiency in bacteria that produce short chain fatty acids in the gut. So now you're starting to tie together stories of the bacteria are deficient, the signal's deficient in a certain way. So then you're starting to think of, okay, so if you're only treating acne, say from the outside, are you only doing half the story at that point? Because, maybe there are other factors, and we know this to be true now. I mean, nutrition plays a vast importance in acne. By the way, 10 years ago, in conventional medicine, it was thought nutrition didn't play a role. That pendulum has swung now. But nutrition clearly plays a role. And now the question we want to ask is how? And I feel like other traditions have had approaches to thinking about nutrition. And I think looking to those traditions like Ayurveda and understanding what were the recommendations that you were making, and let's try to understand that in the context of what we're learning today. So if we're learning something about the gut microbiome, how did Ayurveda approach this? And can we tie that back into the research of the gut microbiome? And we did this sort of a thing. We just published a study looking at manjistha, which is an herb that is frequently used in Ayurveda, but not talked about too much, I would say, outside of Ayurvedic circles. And triphala, which is getting more and more traction, I think, even outside of Ayurvedic circles. And then turmeric. I mean, who doesn't know about turmeric? Actually, a lot of people probably haven't heard of it if you're not used to cooking with it and whatnot, but I think a lot of people know about turmeric. And we looked at how do these things affect the gut microbiome and how do they shift the gut microbiome. And so I think, when we start looking at how traditions impact and how the gut microbiome impacts the body, I think there's definitely connections. But the beautiful thing is now we can look at how can we incorporate therapies that are already there and how does that make shifts and can we incorporate that into the conventional approach.
I'm so glad you brought up this diet piece because, I'm part of a mother's group on Facebook. There's always a mother that's saying, hey, my kid is having this, and she'll ask the mothers, like instead of going to the doctor, one mother will ask the mother's group, have you guys seen this before on your kid? What do I do about it? And it's kind of interesting to see how everybody chimes in with a solution, even though they have no background on what caused it or whatever. But everyone's speaking from their own experience of maybe I saw something like that in my kid and this is what I did. So it's not completely unfounded recommendations. But, this one mother was saying that there was a rash going on with her child and she doesn't know what to do about it. And she's tried hydrocortisone and, all the things that you typically do when you see a rash and it's not helping. And then I said, well, you might want to look at the diet, and then I just left it at that because I'm not going to give health advice over and truly they need to see someone to dig into it more. But, this idea that the inside out is so important with creating our tissues, how we eat is essentially going to make the tissues. So regarding skin though, because it's a unique type of tissue in our body and you're an expert in skin. You talk about skin all day. What is the function of skin? And I know we have internal skin and we have internal and external skin. What would you say is like the purpose of skin and the function of it?
Oh my gosh, skin crosses so many things. But yeah, I guess maybe that's why I was so interested in the gut microbiome. It's our internal skin in many ways, isn't it? It's on the inside. Well, the reason, and I'm totally biased, and that doesn't mean you have to take anything I take with a grain of salt. Please take everything in because I'm totally biased, but I love the skin. The skin it's in essence, I think it's magical because if you think about what the skin affords, it affords not only from a physical standpoint, it keeps things out from getting into the skin because it works as a skin barrier, but actually it keeps things in that aren't supposed to be leaving. So you have a very thin layer of dead skin called the stratum corneum, which is literally just micrometers thick, which is, a micrometer is like 1/1,000,000th of a meter. I mean, you're talking tiny little amounts of distances here that help to trap water in your skin. And without it, you have conditions that are just horrific. You can have massive water loss and death even. If you lose all your skin at once, those kind of conditions do occur in very acute emergencies. But even with things like eczema, your skin barrier is broken, you're not trapping water in, your skin is very dehydrated. And then, when that happens, it's a setup for getting irritation. So, there's that physical aspect, but, there's this more nuanced social and emotional aspect of it. I mean, your senses are on your skin. You feel, you touch, and that can bring comfort or it can bring pain. Or you have the social underpinnings. It can lead to prejudice, or it can lead to familiarity, or it can lead to a sense of community, and so all of these things are there. The tool is just a tool, or the skin is just the skin. And, the ways humans have interpreted the skin for millennia has just been so fascinating. I take one sliver of it, which is looking at how can I help from a health disease standpoint. But I mean, we also cross-cut into psychology, sociology, just social interactions. I mean, there's so many factors in there with skin, Heather, that, the question is, the only way I can put it all together is it's magical. Not that it's like some foreign thing that we can't prove scientifically, but there are just these qualities about skin that you can't just wrap into one word.
No one better to talk about this than you, having the experience that you have. And that's why it must be so challenging for people. I actually haven't had a lot of skin issues in my life. I probably do fall in the category of somebody who loses water, though. We should talk about that, Raja.
I do too, by the way. I am very vata heavy. So I have eczema personally.
But interestingly, it must be in a part of your body that I don't normally see, because you do have gorgeous skin. Every time I see you, that's one of the things that I pick up most. Do you have some like skincare secrets and that you've been using for a long time that you learned either through dermatology or studying Ayurvedic medicine?
Oh gosh, first of all, Heather, thank you so much. I've never thought of my skin in that way. I was lucky in the sense in my face. I have a tendency towards dry skin and eczema. So I really work on moisturizing, and I really try to work on habits. I mean, simple little habits like, when I get out of the shower, I don't rub with the towel. I just pat dry. I put on a moisturizer right away. Sometimes it'll be an oil. Sometimes it'll just be a standard moisturizer. But I was lucky I didn't have acne. And, some things are kind of just genetically predisposed. I eat pretty healthy, and I think that makes a big difference. But what I think is the overriding factor that I have seen in a lot of people? People say you need to sleep 8 hours to have a really healthy lifestyle. I think you have to sleep the amount that makes you feel vital. And it's not always going to be 8 hours for everybody, as an example, but I feel just really energized by life. There's always going to be the negative things that come up. I've kind of over the years tried to take a positive spin to things. You still lose loved ones. There are times when you'll feel lonely. I've even felt senses of loneliness during COVID. It's one of those things where all of us will struggle with things, but how much optimism do you have? And I think those things do show up on the outside. I think that the more vital you feel, the more optimistic you feel, the more hopeful you feel, or the more energized you feel. I think that translates over. And, I don't sleep 8 hours a night. I sleep like 6 to 7, and sometimes it's 5 or 4, but I feel alive and I feel like I'm doing something that's interesting. So I feel like that matters even more. And I think that's what all of us are striving to do. We don't want to be burnt out. You don't want to have regrets. And so I think, you try to do the best you can to manage with that.
Yeah, and if you feel whole inside and if you feel healthy inside, you're going to digest your food better, and that's going to create better tissues, and you're going to have beautiful skin, and you're going to be happier. And it just makes complete sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think if you can feel not tethered to any one negative thought, it makes a huge difference because we all have something we can feel negative about. It's true. If you look at everybody, whether it's something internal or external, if someone's dealing with acne and it's profound, then, sometimes they'll focus on that. But some of us have other issues in our lives that we can really focus on. And I think the big question is, how do you still remain optimistic in that scenario? And you can say, oh, it could be really tough, but a couple of my patients have been monks, and I've spoken to them about this, and a couple of my patients have been refugees in Thailand, and they've been in internment camps before they came over as refugees to the United States. And I sometimes, by the way, this is why I love medicine. I mean, you get to see patients from all walks of life, and I feel like I'm constantly learning. And I ask them, do you feel optimistic, hopeful, or, do you feel angry? And it's amazing. Some of them do feel angry, but there are these folks that just have that glint in their eye. And they said, well, I walked my path to get here, but now my kids have a chance and I feel optimistic about where my life's going to be now. And gosh, if they can forgive or they can move on, I mean, that makes it a heck of a lot easier for me to look at negative interactions that come up and say, you know what, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Just what we choose to focus on and that we actually have a say in it.
Exactly. I think there's more control of how we approach things. So I try to teach that to my patients too along the way. I try to impart that sort of an attitude that we are going to take care of the skin. This is very serious. I'll tell you, there are some very serious and very debilitating skin conditions that can be socially devastating, but I still try to partially be a cheerleader to help them see the positive in things.
Well, I've seen you in action because when I was in Ayurveda school, you let me come up and shadow you for the day. Remember that?
I too. That was a great time, Heather. I loved having you.
Yeah, and I learned so much and I got to see you in action, and just I know that you don't always have as much time with the patients, that if you had more time, you could make more of a difference. And I think that we all feel that way.
Yeah.
And so, just the things that you are able to do in the time that you have with people is so beautiful. Raja, I am so grateful that you were able to take this time. I know you're super busy, so thank you so much for being here. And the listeners that want to get in touch with you and learn more about your work, how do you recommend they do that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Heather. I mean, I think what you're doing is awesome. I love the fact that you've, put out a publication on fertility. I think we need more people talking about how to get in tune with their bodies. We have a wellness website called Jivome, and Jiva is Sanskrit for vitality. The biome, I think of it as an ecosystem, a terrain, as you mentioned. And I think we all have our personal journeys to find what's going to be the right fit to make us energized, make us feel excited about a life day to day. So what we do on there is we delve into vast different topics. We have articles in there. We talk about different sort of diet plans and things. And it's going to be releasing much more into the new year. So you can find me at gvome.com. And separately, if you're a practitioner and you're thinking about integrative medicine, come check us at the Integrative Dermatology Symposium. Even if you're not a physician, you don't have to be a physician. I mean, you could be a nutritionist, you could be an Ayurvedic practitioner, you could be in any walk of life. So I don't want to make it seem like the symposium is only for people that are trying to practice medicine as a physician. We have a wide group of people that come, naturopathic doctors, traditional Chinese medicine specialists, herbalists. And so I really feel like having a community that really does talk and not trying to figure out who's got the biggest ego is the better way to go. Because at the end of the day, we all have something we can learn from each other. And I don't see the point not learning from each other because it's only going to make us all better. So come check us out, the Integrative Derm Symposium, otherwise.
That sounds so cool, Raja. Just keep the surgeons to a level and then you'll keep some of the ego out of it.
Actually,
I'm just kidding.
It's really interesting. I know a lot of surgeons now that have started to really delve into integrative medicine. And I think it's because a lot of them see the surgeries that they keep doing over and over again. For example, I know a couple of cardiovascular surgeons that have done enough bypass surgeries that, they obviously see a biased sample, but they've started to look at, well, how the heck do we get people healthier? Like, I don't want to keep having to, have this conversation at the point where they need surgery. It would be really nice if there's some way we can impact health. And at some point, it starts to imbibe into them, And so, yeah, a lot of them are softening up too. I think a lot of them realize there's major impacts if you don't live well as you go along with your health.
Yeah, I hope you took that as a joke because frankly, I do want my surgeon to have an ego.
I totally took it as a joke. I mean, you want them to be sure of themselves, right? You don't want them thinking like, oh, do I cut here? It's like, no. You need to know where you're cutting.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, all my friends who are medical doctors, I think anybody who feels like they keep getting a repeat problem and that they'd love to be able to prevent the problem. They'd love to be able to,
exactly,
not see this person even coming with that situation. Right?
And no, it's true. That's exactly what it is. It's just you see the same problems over and over again. You start to realize, gosh, there could be a different way we could impact public health at a bigger scale if people could see that there's a different way of looking at themselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Raj. I've enjoyed our talk.
Of course. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.